Fire is such a critical and integral part of longleaf pine. You can't really have a thriving longleaf pine stand if you don't introduce fire. I've seen a couple people do it without fire, but honestly, those that implement fire regularly have a much healthier, thriving plantation, forest, whether you wanted to make it look more natural or more plantation style. Fire is a key component of that type of ecosystem. So how does fire help habitat? All right, fuel reduction. What exactly is fuel? So you'll hear a lot of foresters, especially, and other natural resources professionals talking about it has a heavy fuel load, it has a light fuel load. And if you're not familiar with fire and fire terminology, you're like, okay, well, that's cool, but what is, fuel? Not filling up my car. Like, what exactly does that mean? And really, it's just the amount of vegetation and debris on the forest floor that is combustible. So almost anything will, catch on fire at some point. And the more you have out there, the more of an increased risk you are for fire. So it's your pine straw, it's your leaves, it's your sticks, it's your woody shrubs, other herbaceous plants, stumps, dead trees, live trees even, but you have to have a pretty big fire for live trees to actually catch on fire. But the more litter that you have on that forest floor, the more intense your fire is going to be. So fuel, is simply the amount of vegetation you have in your understory and on your forest floor. But this is important to understand because the more fuel you have, that you're at a higher risk and an increased risk of more impactful wildfires. So when you reduce your fuel by introducing prescribed burns, you are reducing the risk of major wildfires. Now you're still going to have some small ones because wildfires are just, part of nature. Lightning strikes, heaven forbid if you get any arsony out there, but if you're near railroad tracks, those spark fires all the time. And so wildfire is a part of life, but when you have good fuel reduction and good prescribed fire regime, your impact is going to be a lot lower. So I wanted to point out a few indicators of wildfire versus the prescribed burn. So you see these two pictures, but on the left is the wildfire and the tops are before and the bottoms are afters. And they're not taken at the exact same spot, but they are taken, they're taken at the same spot, but they're like 180 degrees from one another. So I'm standing in a fire break and I took a photo of the unburned side and I took a photo of the burned side. So it's relatively similar and a good comparison. So this wildfire on the left, you can kind of see what the vegetation looked like before the entire area got burned. And you can see underneath how intense that wildfire was. Like everything is gone. Everything's orange, everything's black. Compared to the right, your prescribed burn up top has a lot less fuel. If you can kind of notice the heavier, denser woody shrubs from the wildfire photos compared to the prescribed burn, this was regularly burned stand. And you can see that understory is a lot lower to that forest floor. There are some differences in tree densities, but we're not going to talk about that today. And you can see on the bottom of the prescribed burn photo, it's a lot less of a devastating impact. So when you're driving by an area, how can you tell if it was a wildfire or a prescribed burn? One of the big indicators are scorch marks. So you see on this wildfire, this tree looks like it's almost all black. And that's because the scorch went all the way up to, I don't know how tall that is, like 30 feet or something, which means the flames were, 20, 30 plus feet tall and heavily impacted those trees. So when you have a lot of trees that have very tall scorch marks like that, it's a very good indicator that it likely was a wildfire. You can on prescribed burns have some trees that have high scorch marks where they kind of, flare up. But overall, in this prescribed burn one, it's a lot harder to see, I know, just because of the smoke and lighting, but the scorch mark you can see is so much lower. It's like pretty much 5 feet and under. You really don't even want scorch marks 5 feet tall. You're looking at like 3 feet and under. So you can see that overall, these trees don't look black compared to the wildfire photo. These ash deposits, you can see right here on the wildfire forest floor, it's all gray. And that's pretty much what the understory was, except it burned so hot, so long, and so intense. It just took everything completely to ash. Now compare that to the prescribed burn floor. You can see there's still a little bit of vegetation. You can see it didn't wipe everything completely out. You're not really seeing any, ash deposits, meaning the areas that did burned up pretty well, but not so intensely that it instantly became like gray ash. There's no nutrients left. It's just all ash, and it's going to take a while for it to return. And honestly, it's going to catch on fire again because the little amount of needles that did remain, all that orange up there, they're going to fall off. So those trees are dead. They're not coming back either. New growth. So I kind of touched on this briefly. But why does this matter? It's because most wildlife actually eat the new growth of vegetation. And fire keeps that new growth close to the ground, accessible to the ground. So now I'm talking about, omnivores and herbivores, not coyotes or anything like that. But the wildlife that's out there, the wildlife you're probably wanting to promote, they really don't eat the woody stems or the older leaves because they're just usually a lot harder to digest. So they're looking for that new growth on all of your understory out there. And if you let things kind of just keep on going and don't reset that understory, that new growth is getting higher and higher and higher. And your deer, obviously are probably going to be able to reach it, but your other wildlife that you're maybe trying to promote and enhance are not going to be able to have as much access to that more nutritious vegetation. And especially if you have gopher tortoise, you're wanting to keep a good, healthy grasses and herbaceous plants and forbs close to that forest ground, because tortoises, they're pretty short, so they don't have a very good reach anyway. Diversity. So fire is going to increase your diversity of different types of species and plants. Now, this topic I'm only going to lightly touch on. Fire can increase the diversity in the diverse plant system of your forest type. And this is important because diversity usually means a healthier ecosystem. So say you have primarily longleaf as your overstory, and that's fine and dandy. You want a pretty diverse understory because that's, again, only going to help your wildlife population and your wildlife habitat. Many native species respond positively to fires. So when you start introducing fires, and especially if you start kind of alternating the seasons you put it in, they're going to impact your native seasons differently. Some seasons are going to get rid of your woody shrubs and your oaks. And other seasons are really going to promote that grass stimulation and your herbaceous plants and forbs. If you have, say, you're like, oh, I don't have a diverse understory, maybe just adding a fire in there and see what pops back up. And you'd be surprised the amount of seeds that just kind of lay dormant in the soil waiting for that stimulation to occur, or for that shading to kind of be lessened and opened up so they can grow and thrive. Now, I will make a disclaimer. Some invasive species really thrive in disturbances and fire. So you kind of need to know if you have an really dense invasive species population out there, or if you have an invasive species problem. Because if you add fire, that could allow them to really just explode out of control. But kind of staying engaged and understanding what types of invasive species to be on the lookout for, and then when you see one, you can reach out to your local professionals to figure out how to control it. Whether you need to do some herbiciding before you burn, maybe like immediately after you burn to stop that spread, maybe in conjunction with burning to really kind of decimate it and eradicate it to the best of your ability. But overall, fire could do that, but it's really going to help your native species kind of respond.